You froze a couple of times on me. I'm hoping my internet will be up to this. Rural internet is always an iffy thing, but I wish I could have been there in person, y'all. I'm sorry I can't join you live, but I'm glad to be talking to this group. Years ago, I don't know, was anyone, I can't remember how many years ago it was that I did a talk on activism. I can just barely see the auditorium picture, so I can't see if people raise their hands. So we're gonna try to make this interactive, despite the fact that I can't. Let me see if I can get that bigger so I can see y'all. And I can't. So I'm just gonna have to live with that. So how many folks in here, and I'm going to do this even though I only have a vague ability to, there, I've gotten it to where I can see if you raise hands. Good. How many folks in here have ever called an elected official, whether it's local, state, federal? No hands. Well, okay, a couple of hands there. I wouldn't have been able to raise my hand before I started FARFA. I had never called any of my elected officials. I couldn't have even told you who my state rep was. I had no clue. So I start with that because I'm going to be diving pretty deeply into how to be an effective advocate. Now, oftentimes people believe that it takes a degree. You have to be a lawyer like I am, or you have to have been politically active, come from a family that does those things or whatever it is. And that's just not true. There are basic things that will probably sound extremely common sense to you when they're spoken out loud. But they aren't things you necessarily know because we aren't taught these things really in our society. We're taught that civic engagement consists of going and voting once every 4 years, once every 2 years if you're really active. And that's it. And then, these guys go off into the never land of the Capitol in Austin or in DC, and they're just supposed to go along their merry way. Or perhaps you how many people here have signed like an electronic petition? One of the things where it's like, send a message to your legislator and, there's a letter there and you just click the button and it gets sent off to your elected reps. How many folks have signed one of those? Yeah. They don't work. Or more to the point, they work very well to build up mailing lists. They work very poorly to affect your elected officials. And so we're going to talk about the stuff that does work. But first I'll talk, and a lot of my focus will be on state legislative work, because that is where that's first and foremost where we as Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance do our work. But what I tell you about working with elected officials applies no matter what. It's really the exact same thing for local or for federal. And you work at whichever level you feel called to, wherever there's an issue that affects you and that you want to engage on. And it takes a lot less than you'd think. So for instance, we've all read these headlines, about the phone lines getting completely tied up, or, congressional members getting thousands of emails on the topic, right? Everybody's heard that, talked about it, some context. And you come away from that thinking that's what it takes. It takes being able to mobilize thousands of people, and heck, half the time they don't listen to you then. Cornyn voted this way when I know that he got thousands of contacts telling him not to. They don't listen, they don't care. And there's some truth to that. Certainly, if you are trying to affect a legislator's opinion on taxes, abortion, gun rights, you're going to have a tough slog. And it's going to take thousands, and there's very little chance of doing it because they have staked out positions about those topics. Guess how many legislators have staked out positions about local foods? 2 or 3. The ones that are, the chair of the ag committee typically does, because, the big ag groups talk to him a lot, a few people here and there, but most legislators just don't even know what the heck you're talking about. And when you go in on an issue like that, and you're talking to them about something that they don't have a staked out position on to begin with, I have seen one good constituent dialogue turn a legislator into a supporter. Now that's high quality communication. That's a constituent who's got a real story to tell about this issue and who communicates it clearly and effectively to the staffer. But I've also seen even just some very short, simple contacts, 3 or 4 or 5 phone calls to a state rep's office, the sort of phone calls that are 2 minutes long, absolutely impact them. This is where it's a lot more fun to be in person, because I can act this out. So unfortunately, I'm sitting here, won't be quite as much my normal action, but I walk into a legislator office and I go to the front desk and I'm like, hi, my name's Judith McGeary. I'm with the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. Can I talk to the staffer who's handling cottage foods? And I can tell you within 30 seconds if they've been getting constituent calls. Because if they haven't, what I get is, hold on, let me see who that is. And I'll be like, it'd be Public Health Committee. She's like, oh, Public Health Committee, that's Susan. Give me a minute. Let me see if she's available. They shuffle papers and I might get in to talk to that staffer, I might not. If they've gotten calls, and it really could be 3 or 4 calls, when I come in and give that spiel, it's, oh, the cottage foods bill, that's in public health, right? Susan's been hoping someone would come in and talk with her about that. And half the time Susan pokes her head out of her office and goes, did she say cottage foods? Get her back here. Because that's all it takes, 3 or 4 calls. And they're like, what? Why are our constituents caring about this? We want to understand this more. And then they're ready to really listen when I give them the detailed nuts and bolts breakdown of what the issue is. So that's how little it can take. It's very simple, very, very low resource needed on your part. So let me get into some of the specific topics I think are generally of the most interest in the gardening and homesteading community. And we'll use some of these for some specifics on like how to play this out, as well as talking about like what the topics really are. So I'll start with one that is really directly aimed at the backyard gardening, or actually not backyard gardening, the front yard gardening community. And it's what we call the Home Food Security Bill. And we worked on this bill in the legislature last session, and we're going to be bringing it back this session. And we called it the Home Food Security Bill because it is about people being able to raise food for themselves and their families. And what it says is that neither cities nor homeowners associations can ban people from having up to 6 chickens or 6 rabbits or some combination thereof in their backyard, or from having front yard or side yard gardens. So the idea was basic protein sources and fruits and vegetables. You would not believe how difficult this bill was to work on. The cities were upset and lobbied against it. Not terribly hard. Most of them, they weren't happy, but they were willing to work with us. The homeowners associations, you would have thought that we were like, yay, everyone can park junk Jeeps in their front yards forever. It was like the world is coming to an end if there is a garden in the front yard or a few chickens in the backyard. And we worked the bill very hard. And there were a lot of constituent calls. People called their legislators, and we saw the result, because despite the fact that in Texas, the homeowners association lobby is very powerful. It's actually, compared to most other states, an extremely powerful lobby. We got it through the House with 1 dissenting vote. There were literally, it's quite a fun video to watch. You can hear cheers of freedom from the legislators on the floor of the House as the vote was taken. So it was a great bill. It got through the House, And then it died in the Senate. And it died painfully without getting committee hearing. Largely, we think because the chair of the committee, we assume, was listening to the homeowners associations. That's the answer we never got, but was our best bet. And so we're working on it again this session. But I've got, how many folks in here, has anybody in here dealt with problems from either the city? I mean, Austin, I don't think is actually difficult, but how many of y'all live in homeowners associations that might have restrictions on your ability to raise food for yourselves? Nobody. You guys live in all friendly HOAs. Okay, a couple of hands. There we go. That's unusual. Usually if I ask that question in a group, lots of hands go up very quickly, because it's getting very, very hard to ever find a home that's not in an HOA. And the HOAs really, most of them pretty reflexively are just anti-food rearing. There's an attitude of that's not what we do in these neighborhoods. So if that's an issue to you or to someone you know, I'd encourage you to get involved. And so what happens on issues that we take up, like that one, is we'll send out action alerts. So I'll share my screen for a moment. Oops, I have to get out of full screen. And just take y'all to our website for a moment so that you can, oops, wrong sharing. Sorry, let me try this again. Hello. Okay, I actually really do Zoom all the time. I'm just having trouble for some reason tonight. Come on, computer, why are you doing this? There, I lost my bar. There we go. New share. That one is what I want. Oh, I see. It's because I have this as full screen. Got it. I just need to minimize this. There we go. Okay, can you all see the website now? Is that coming through okay? Okay. So this is the FARFA website. You just go to farmandranchfreedom.org. And one of the things I wanted to make sure you spotted is this button up here, sign up for our emails. And you just sign up. The only thing I'm really concerned about is, if at all possible, give us your postal code, because that helps us find out what legislative district you're in. So when we send out an alert, we can know if we need, like, if you are in a key member's district for a fight we're in, we're able to give you a specific heads up that we, there's something special going on in your district. But it's free emails. And when we send them out, you will not see a click here to have your email sent to the legislators. We don't use that. We have the capacity. We have the technical capacity in our system, and we won't use it. Because like I said at the beginning, it doesn't work. I walked into a legislative staffer's office last session, and she was stuffing a big stack of papers into her bag, big 3-4 inch stack of papers. And I'm like, evening. She goes, hi. She goes, guess what these are? And I said, form letters. She said, yep. And now they're scratch paper for my kid. Literally. That's what they think of form letters. You send them a form letter, they don't care. You pick up the phone and do a 2-minute phone call, and they care. So when we send out those action alerts, that's what you're going to see, is that guidance on call this person, and this is what, some of the key talking points to make. Obviously, we're also a membership organization. And if you want to learn more about the legislative bills we're working on in the Texas State Legislature, we have here priority issues for the 2023 Texas legislative session. And we will also post updates on the Farm Bill. I'm trying to think if there's a recent one. I don't think there's a recent one, but we will be posting updates on the Farm Bill as well. But sticking for a while with Texas legislative. Oh, and actually, let me share one more thing. I'm going a little bit off topic, but we have a fabulous dinner coming up next Thursday in San Antonio. So not that far of a drive. It's the Chefs for Local Farmers dinner. Check it out. It's a dozen of the top chefs in San Antonio paired up with a dozen farmers to use local ingredients for a really fabulous evening. So with that short plug, I'll go back to the topic of the evening, which is advocacy. So let me halt the share. Actually, I'll stay here. You guys, this might be helpful. I don't expect you to read this obviously off the screen, but as you'll see, here's the home food security. Another thing that may be of particular interest to the gardening community and and this one applies and has helped all sorts of people at every scale really, is the cottage foods, the home food based food systems. So before 2011, it was illegal to make so much as a dozen cookies in your kitchen and sell them. In 2011, we got the first cottage food law passed, which legalized a very small sliver of activity in people's home kitchens where they could sell baked goods and jams and jellies directly to consumers out of their homes. That was it. And we've expanded in 2013 and 2019, and we're coming back in 2023 to expand it again. Right now, under the law, you can sell any non-potentially hazardous food, which is basically almost anything that would be pantry-based food. Something you'd keep in your pantry rather than in your fridge. There are a few exceptions. You can't do anything meat. So even though jerky is a pantry food, you couldn't sell jerky. But, huge range of foods can be sold directly to consumers anywhere in the state. Farmers markets, flea markets, side of the road, whatever it is, up to $50,000 per year. And we are coming in this next legislative session to, first of all, try to raise that cap so that it's not limited to $50,000 per year, which was a reasonable limit 11 years ago when the cap was first put in. And also to expand some options such as more internet sales and particularly indirect sales through small scale grocers. So that local co-ops, local home delivery services could carry cottage food items. So that's could open up a lot of opportunities for home-based food businesses. Another one that is, I have to say, is borderline because it is meant for farmers, but certainly sort of a serious homesteader would fall under the category of what we're talking about, because it's not based on commercial activity per se, but on using your property primarily for agricultural use. And that is under the property taxes. So under state law, someone whose land is principally used for agricultural uses to the degree of intensity generally accepted in the area gets what's known as open space valuation or ag valuation, and a very significant reduction in their property taxes. There is no minimum acreage in the statute. Under state law, anyone of any size theoretically can get property tax ag valuation. Unfortunately, most counties, including Travis County, have come in and said, well, we think that you need at least 10 acres or at least 15 acres to be an ag property, and have really just out of hand dismissed anybody who's doing what we'd call market farming, mixed fruits and vegetables, that the sort of thing you'd take to a farmer's market, on a weekend, as just not being agricultural use. And so this bill would set up stakeholder groups with the comptroller to set up statewide guidelines so that smaller acreages, people doing market farming, people doing diversified and organic production on their property would get fair treatment for their property taxes. Because that's, let me specify, also call out organics. Another area that there's been a lot of problems with is with cover cropping, because the counties will come out and say, you've just got that in weeds. That's not an ag crop. And the person goes, it's a cover crop. I farm organically. I have to do cover crops. I rotate. And the county doesn't want to recognize it. So this is a bill to ensure that the smaller acreages and market farms are treated fairly on property taxes. So trying to think, do y'all have a good way for people to ask questions? I don't know if there's a mic out in the audience.
Yeah, I can relay any questions. So
okay. I should have said this at the beginning. I want to encourage people, please feel free to break in with questions. This is the other thing that's much nicer about doing this talk in person is interactive is far more fun than the talking head approach, which literally is the talking head when we're on Zoom.
Yeah. We have one question.
Mhm.
Under number 6, would a nursery fit into that?
So I didn't hear that.
Fit into that. So under number 6, the
Mhm.
fair property taxes for small farmers, would that apply to nurseries?
So there's a horticulture valuation specifically. And I don't know the details of it, but there should be there should be standards in the county for horticulture, and I think nurseries should qualify for that. But I'd be happy to work with you. If you've tried and been denied, you know, I'd be happy to take a look and talk with you about it. A lot of people, one thing I'd say, first of all, for everybody, two things to keep in mind on property taxes. One is none of these affect the value of the buildings. So whether it's for a farm or a horticulture operation or whichever, it affects the underlying value of the land and how it's taxed, but it will not provide any sort of a break on buildings. The other thing is don't accept no unless you think they're right. Like if you've looked at it and they're right, fine, accept a no. But a lot of times people get told like, oh no, you won't qualify because of X, Y, and Z. And it's not right, or it's certainly not a definitive barrier. Fill out the application, put it in, push. Because a lot of times what happens is, you know, they just discourage people from applying. Even when they qualify. Now, another thing to keep in mind also is it does for ag valuation, and I don't know horticulture specifically, but ag, it does have to have been for 5 of the last 7 years. So if you just started, you won't qualify. It is going to be something that takes several years of track record to build up for it. But start keeping the records for that.
Any other questions?
Okay. So let me use let me use actually the home food security bill as the example to on how to think about advocacy. Let me sort of shift back to where we started, which was thinking about advocacy generally. And let me use home food security as an example of how to think about this. So one thing is to realize about your elected officials, and this is true at every level, is they don't have enough hours in the day to actually do all of the things they're expected to do. And I didn't used to have a whole lot of sympathy for them. And then I started lobbying, and I spent, you know, days upon days and 100-hour weeks up at the legislature and realizing, and that's on my stuff. that's on ag and food, and you know what we get into water and a few related topics. That's it. I'm not doing taxes. I'm not doing abortion. I'm not doing transportation. I'm not doing, you know, graphite mining. I'm not doing education. I'm not doing any of that. And there's more to be done than seems possible. And so they do what people do when they don't have enough hours in the day to be informed on a topic. They listen to people they know. They look to somebody to tell them what to do and what to think on it. Now that somebody sometimes isn't a fellow legislator. So for instance, even if your legislator isn't on a key committee, you know, that's always the best thing. You have a legislator on ag, rock, that's wonderful. But maybe your legislator isn't on any of the key committees. He or she may be really good friends with somebody who's on one of the key committees. And they look to each other very much. So they each develop expertises and perspectives. And if so-and-so has to make a decision about something and they don't know what the heck's going on, but their buddy, their seatmate knows it, they're going to listen to them. It also means that they listen to the people who they've got maybe some other reason to trust. And that is where citizen lobbying comes in. And that's where looking at it as a relationship comes in. Because if you are someone they know in some form, fashion, capacity, they're far more likely to listen to you. And it doesn't mean they have to go to church or synagogue or mosque or the mosque with you or play golf with you. It absolutely can be you've never talked with them outside the context of the legislature, but you've talked with them in the context of the legislature. And I will say also, I will mesh together legislators and their staff. So when I say talk to them, it very often doesn't need to be the legislator themselves. You will often talk to their staff, and that's fine and dandy. That is very good because their staff are their translators. The staff take in all of this information and summarize it and come up with a recommendation. And guess what? Legislators tend to listen to their staff because they hired those staff to do that for them. And so they're going to pay attention when the staff tells them, okay, we heard from X, Y, and Z, and, this lobby group and that lobby group, and there were some constituents. And, I think the constituents made a really good point. And here's what they were saying. Yeah, that's going to weigh in very heavily for the legislator. So you want to think about your elected officials and their staff and building that relationship. So for instance, right now, October, we had talked, I had hoped to come down in person, but we weren't going to be able to manage that till January. And no, I'll talk to this group in October because right now is a great time to call them before the legislature starts, before they're in session. October, November, December, prime time to call them. So you find out who your legislators are and you decide which of these issues, and we'll use home food security as our example. Let's say you care about this. You really want to have chickens in your backyard and the HOA you live in doesn't allow it. And so you've been hiding your chickens under cover or just not getting them. And so you are like, I want to take up this issue. You find out who your legislators are, your state rep and your state senator. If it's a federal issue, you look to Congress. If it's a local issue, you look to your city council member. And you call them and you're like, hi, my name's Judith McGeary, and I live in Cameron. I'm a constituent. I was hoping to set up a time to talk with the legislator or, the chief of staff or whoever would be appropriate, whichever staff would be appropriate, about some issues about, raising food, agriculture and food. And you might get past to someone right away. They might be like, oh, that'll be Susie. I keep picking on Susie. That'll be Susie. And you know what? She's free now. Let me just transfer you over. That might happen. Often doesn't, especially now. Let's be clear. They're not working long hours right now. This is interim. They're taking some time to breathe before they start the 100-hour weeks during session. So probably, you'll be setting up a meeting, which is great. You want to set a time so that you've got their attention. And then what you want to do is you want to explain it clearly and concisely. You want to tell them what the problem is, why they should care about it, and what they can do about it. Those are the three things that matter. And you want to be able to do that in about 5 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean you say everything you'd ideally want to say in 5 minutes. You can hopefully it'll be a lot longer. But recognize that what you want is to be able to impress those three basics on them very, very quickly and simply. So it could be like, hi, my name's Judith McGeary. I live in Cameron. It's a great little town, but I live in an HOA. It's kind of crazy that we have an HOA here, but I couldn't find a house that I liked that wasn't in the HOA, that fit my price range. And I really didn't have a choice about where I moved. And so I bought the house, and, after that freeze, when I saw the grocery store shelves go empty, it really drove home to me how fragile our food system is. And I want to be able to provide affordable protein for my kids. And now, have you seen the price of groceries? I mean, food inflation's going through the roof. If I can have 6 chickens, that's enough eggs for my family on a regular basis and some extra to give away to our friends and our family members. And I can make sure that my kids have high quality food that we can afford on a regular basis. But my HOA says no chickens. My neighbor can have his loud barking dog, but I can't have a few hens. So, there was a bill last session. It was HB 1686, and it would have allowed me to have my chickens in my backyard. And it would have included all sorts of things to try to address the HOA's objections. I couldn't have a rooster, and I would have to make sure that there weren't smells coming from my backyard because, I don't want to cause a problem for my neighbors. I fully agree making sure that my neighbors are protected. Something like House Bill 1686 would mean that I could have my chickens, my neighbors wouldn't have a problem, and everybody would be okay. Do you think, Rep so-and-so would be willing to sponsor or support a bill like that this session? What the problem is, why should they care? Because the people in their district want food and what they can do about it. Those 3 things. And then, of course, there's all sorts of permutations on expanding on that. But you've just given them this message. That is, I won't say golden. Let me start with silver. That gets you the silver medal. That's a really powerful, strong showing. Now let's go to what gets you the gold medal. This really matters to you. You really are the person I just talked about, or the person we had come testify at the legislature on that bill, who literally, her father went through the Depression and she grew up with him hiding cans of food under the bed and just all of this food insecurity and trauma, and really felt passionately about providing food for her kids so that they didn't have that kind of trauma. So you're that person. It really, really matters to you that you want to get this through. What you do is you take about 10 minutes, 15 minutes ahead of time, and you go to your legislators' websites or their Facebook pages or their Twitter feed. Websites are a great start. And on all of the websites, actually, let me go ahead and pull up somebody's website for a minute. Actually, let me pull up Texas Legislature online. So if you want to know who your legislators are, and again, I'll do state, but you can do this. You can go do the city and find this information for your city people. You can, find it for Congress. But here, Texas actually has a very good site, and you see it's who represents me. And you just type in your information. So I am going to go to Cameron, where I live, which thankfully, actually, I do not live in an HOA. But the rest of the story is true. And here is my state rep, Terry Wilson. So let's click on Mr. Wilson. And here's his bio. He's a retired Army colonel, decorated combat veteran who holds a BS in business administration and an MS in strategic logistics plans and management. He's retired from the Army. All of these things. He has high performance expectations, balancing budgets. He's big on sort of budgets. He's an experience as an advocate for exceptional and talented small businesses, helping them break through bureaucracy to deliver technology to our warfighters. Oh, that's interesting. Let's bookmark that for a moment. He's been married, they have kids, they go to the Baptist church, he's in the Boy Scouts. By the way, let me just say, Wilson's an awesome rep. He was my rep until this session. He's unfortunately been redistricted, but I think he's fantastic. So nothing I say should be taken as snippiness. He's on a probe, so he looks a lot at budget issues. So here's this guy, and you can get an image very quickly reading this. He's a conservative. He is very much into small business. I mean, just the phrase exceptional and talented small businesses. He didn't just say small businesses. He used some adjectives to see how he sees small business. And he doesn't like bureaucracy. So he's very focused on budget issues. So what is someone like him going to like about the Home Food Security Bill? He's going to like sort of the independence of it, the self-sufficiency, the financial security for families, translate this budget focus that he's got here that they're talking about in his legislative work. And you can probably bet maybe he cares about, family budgets being balanced, and he's going to sort of really resonate off of people being concerned of staying within their budget and doing quality things. I like this. If you go down, aggregate productions is gravel mining, basically. His primary focus was to address nuisance concerns with aggregate production companies without over-regulating and overburdening industry. So that balancing language is probably going to he's going to like that. Like we're up for not causing a nuisance for our neighbors and being able to do what we want to do. So Wilson actually is prime placement for this bill. But let's say I'd gotten instead, I don't want to pick on a real one. I'll make up somebody for a moment. A classic liberal. You're which many of you probably have much more of in Austin, the heart of Austin. So you have a classic liberal and you go to their website and it's about helping people in trouble and the underserved and about environmental concerns, right? Some of the classic topics that often will show up on their websites. Well, then I'm probably going to talk more maybe about the food inflation that's happening right now and how people are struggling to pay their grocery bills. And I'm going to, push that angle harder in my conversation for me personally and for the broader community. I know people in my community who are having trouble making ends meet and making sure that they get groceries for their kids. Or whatever it is. How does this relate to your community and the topics that they care about? That's where a gold medal comes in for working with elected officials. It is in some ways, it's no different than any relationship. You will convince people, you will rarely convince someone to agree with you if they didn't agree with you to begin with. Like if what they care about, I'll take the classic conservative liberal thing. If you come in talking about my property rights because of home food security, I should have the right to do what I want to with my property, and you're talking to a classic liberal, you're not going to get there. They'll listen to you because you're a constituent, and they'll want to be on your side. You're a constituent. They want to be on their constituent side, but you're just not ringing their bells. Now you come in, you have a constitutionalist conservative, and you come in and you talk property rights. Oh, there we go. So think about what it is that legislator, that elected official cares about, and how does what you want fit that? And this is where we have a huge advantage in our movement, because there are a lot of movements where that's hard to do. There are a lot of causes where that's hard to do. Not impossible. If you really work at it, and I think it's an important skill to have, you can figure it out. But for us, it's actually really simple, because these types of issues, the cottage foods, the property taxes for small farmers, the home food security, building small regenerative agricultural food supply, I mean, that's good for the environment. It's good for small businesses. It's good for the economy. It's good for security issues. I mean, it's a great thing. So it's not hard to do. It just takes you a few minutes thought and a few minutes research into what your legislator cares about. Get over yourself for a moment and be like, okay, here's what got me into it. I'm an environmentalist, and I came into ag because I am all about clean air, clean water, and no toxins. Good. And if my rep's an environmentalist, I'm going to come in from there. And if my rep is a small business conservative, I'm going to say, environmentalist, this is what brought me in, and look how great this is for small business. And it works because it's genuine. Because the thing is, it's true. It's not that you're making something up. This is our movement is good all over. So there's an example on the home food security. And, you know, again, if I went to someone's website, if I'd gone to Wilson's website and it was all property rights, I'd opened with, this is my land and I want to be able to, you know, take care of my family on my land. Because that's what the website would have been cueing me to focus in on. So does that make sense? Does anybody want to push back on me? That usually, so it's not something, again, we think about. We're taught to come in and just sort of put our stuff and not always think about where the other person's starting from. We want to meet them where they are. Question, yeah?
Are they more interested in responding to questions from us, or do they want us to state a position initially?
Yeah, so Joan is asking, are they wanting us to answer? Sorry.
To present.
Sort of, do you want to open it? Like, is it better sort of the Socratic method where you sort of question them to the way you want them to get to? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes. Or do they want
Okay.
to present our position?
Keep it simple. Tell them your position. They want to know what the problem is, why they care about it, and what they can do about it. They don't want to have to figure it out themselves. They do want you to tell them. Now, having said that, be open that you may not have all the answers. So we're having a problem on cottage foods. So the cottage food, you know, allows people to make low-risk foods in their home kitchens and sell them. And from the beginning, it explicitly removes authority from local health departments to regulate these operations. And this has been settled law for a decade. And all of a sudden we have a bunch of local health departments that are like, yeah, screw it. You can't afford to sue us over a permit. So we're going to like just start requiring cottage food producers to have permits. I mean, literally, that is what has happened. And unfortunately, they're right. I can't afford to sue them. And most people aren't going to over a permit thing. And the reason they can get away with it is because they have something called sovereign immunity, which protects them from damages. So if we sued them, they wouldn't even have to repay the permit fees that they illegally charged. And so I went to a legislative staffer and I was like, we need a bill to remove their sovereign immunity. Like this, I'm done. These guys have pissed me off. They're abusing the whole thing. Let's do this. And instead we sat down and he was like, yeah, I don't think it's going to pass. Like, yeah, I'm sympathizing with you, but I don't think we're going to get there. And they came up with an alternative, which I don't want to, I actually realized as I'm saying this, it's not something I want live streamed out until we've got the bill text ready to file. But let's leave it at, you know, we cooperatively worked up a solution that we think is more likely to pass, more likely to actually succeed, that solves the problem, that gets us where we need it to go. But I started with a solution. I didn't just go in necessarily and be like, oh my God, I don't know what the heck to do. This is a mess. It's worth having some ideas, like what is it that would work? And then being open. And again, it's a relationship. Work with them. What is it? And staff, again, particularly once they know you and they understand your situation, they'll engage you as a partner in those discussions and in figuring out what are solutions. So go ahead. Mm-hmm.
And isn't it likely that we won't actually talk to the representative themselves? We'll talk to one of their staff members?
Yeah, I mean, 90% of the conversations I have are with staff. I mean, that's the most common. There are both advantages and disadvantages to talking to the member themselves. The disadvantage is you probably won't get very much time at all. You know, staff, you know, particularly if you've scheduled a meeting ahead of time, you may talk with them for 20 or 30 minutes. I had a staff meeting go 45 minutes the other day. You know, I just sat there really talking through everything. You know, that's not going to happen when it's the member. You'll get 5 to 10 minutes. End of statement. You better be, you know, you better have made your case. So there's even in some ways a disadvantage to meeting with the legislator. The advantage, of course, is it really drives home, the legislator knows that constituent. There's a different bond. So again, like platinum medal, let's go to the platinum medal. Go in and meet with them. Try to get 5 minutes with the legislator, just so that, like, again, the legislators met you, they can connect the name to a face, and then keep working with the staff. You know, recognizing that like 90% of your conversations or more are going to be with the staff, and that works well. I want to go back one more thing actually and share thought on your question, because it is, you asked a really good question about like leading them to the answer with questions, because that is actually how often you get it best into someone's brain, is you lead them to it by their thought process. The problem is, going back to what I said at the beginning, is these guys are overwhelmed. There's so much. And I have really seen them get confused on really not that complicated of an issue. Like, there are days I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's not what that person just said. How did you get from point A to point B? Like, and I think it's just because they're so overwhelmed and there's so many issues, and they're probably thinking about something else right in the middle of the conversation half the time. So the simpler you can keep it, the better. You really do, for their sake, because otherwise they can get the message turned around so easily. So that's the other reason. Even though usually, yes, it imprints better in someone's mind if they've come up with the answer, you need to just give it to them, and you need to give it to them simply, cleanly, you know, bite-sized pieces. So from the, and again, please feel free to raise hands and breaking on questions. There are lots of ways to get involved. So like October, November, December, this is the time to call them and support the bills. And just to let you know, other bills we're working on at the state level is selling ungraded eggs to restaurants and retailers, so that Wheatsville Co-op and the local sourcing restaurants would be better able to source from small farmers. We're working on bills about meat processing capacity, so to deal with what is one of the biggest problems in our, you know, sustainable farming community, which is lack of processing capacity for small farmers. There's cottage foods, there's home food security. I am forgetting something. Oh, we're working on funding for a healthy soils program to help people who are farmers and ranchers and landowners who are doing methods to build organic matter in their soils, get support from the state government to do so. And so we're going to be working on getting funding for that. So those are the issues we're working on. You can see them on the website. You know, pick the one or two that call to you, either because they directly affect you or just because you really care about them. I mean, it doesn't have to be the story of I want eggs and therefore I need that bill. It can be, you know, I love eating at local restaurants, and I think it would be great if our local restaurants could source eggs, you know, ungraded eggs. I like buying from farmers at the farmers market, and I know that the meat has been difficult to get because of lack of processing capacity. You know, it can be anything that relates to you, that you have a reason to care about. Pick a couple of those, call your state rep and your senator and urge them to work with us on these bills. And let me know what they say. You know, let me know what the reaction is so that we can follow up. And then when we get into legislative session, there's going to be other opportunities. So we hold every year a lobby day. Usually about mid-February is going to be the first one. And we get we put out the call. People come in from not all over the state, because we don't get West Texas. Let's be clear. No one, West Texas is too far to drive. Sometimes we get a panhandle person, but we get pretty good representation up through DFW, Houston, San Antonio. And we pair people up. We put people in groups and go send you off to meet not only with your own legislator, but we turn you into citizen lobbyists. We give you the tools and walk you through the process so that, for instance, you'll go talk to, you know, half a dozen legislators from San Antonio with your group, you know, as part of a group, not on your own. And we always get feedback that people love it. I mean, people come in who've never talked to legislators at all in their lives, and they just go out completely jazzed. I mean, just high energy, feeling like they understand the system. I mean, I get the response from the legislators afterwards too. I mean, I hear it from the offices about the impact that made. We'll actually be holding a lobby day. We're planning it hopefully once a month, actually. We're going to do it probably the second Tuesday of each month. Okay, quick hug and go.
When does this end?
Soon. I'll come in and when I can.
Okay, wake me up.
I will. I promise I'll wake you up. Sorry, giving up bedtime with the kiddo for this. So, you know, I hear from the legislators and their staff that it made an impact. They pay attention when they see the groups of people coming through talking about these issues. And then we'll be doing smaller groups, smaller sort of not events on like once a month, all March, April, and May. Legislative session runs January through the end of May. And that's it, by the way. That's once every 2 years in Texas. You have 5 months and then you're done. And either you get it passed in those 140 days or you're out of luck. And then there's committee hearings. There'll be committee hearings on hopefully all of the bills. All of the bills that we can get committee hearings for, there'll be. We only get very short notice, usually only 5 days notice is what we get. So we'll find out on Friday that our bill is up on Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. And one of the things that really makes a difference is not only having people come testify, which is great, and we always want some people to come testify, but having people come in and sign in and support. So they keep a witness list. To get on that witness list, you have to come in person the day of the hearing, which makes it hard for anybody who doesn't live in Austin, but all of y'all are local. You can just duck up to the Capitol, park in the visitors parking lot, which is free parking for 2 hours, walk your way up to the Capitol, sign in, walk your way back to the car and drive off. Takes about 20 minutes with the walking, 20 to 25 minutes total to walk over, park, walk over, sign in, walk off, and you're now listed as a witness in support or against, because there are bad bills we always have to kill. And those lists are put in the record of that bill. And when legislators are looking at that bill, if and when it comes to the floor and deciding how to vote, they pull up those witness lists and they just see how many people signed in for or against a bill. So, you know, especially since you're in Austin, this is something you can do, you know, take 20 minutes the morning of a hearing and come in and sign in for us. So those are all things you can do. And if you think on translating it to local, let's take for a moment, you know, you guys want to get something through the Austin ordinance on land use. Think when you approach your city council member, what is going to cue them for this? What's important to them? How do you get even a handful of other people? Doesn't take thousands, it takes a handful of people to also contact the city council on this and learn the process. So the process will be different than what I just described for the Texas legislature. It won't be the exact same, but there'll be some version of it. And very often versions of signing up in support of things, it's very common. So years ago, when we were working on the Austin urban farming ordinance, God, that would have been 2013 or something like that. We only had like 10 people signed up to testify, and we only wanted like 8 or 10 people to testify, but we had hundreds of people come and sign their names and support into the official record. And that makes a difference. So again, these things play out a little differently, local versus state, but it's the same principles. And at the federal level, we're working with a coalition. I'll end with this piece and then just any questions. On the federal level, working with a coalition called Regenerate America, which grew out of the Kiss the Ground documentary. How many folks have seen Kiss the Ground? It's good. Probably y'all know most of what's in it. Like I'll bet, like if you watch it, you'll be like, yep. But it's well done. It's well put together about how incredibly valuable the soil is and what it means if we can put organic matter back in the soil. And the Kiss the Ground producers put together the Regenerate America Coalition and actually got a hearing in front of the Congressional House Agriculture Committee on Healthy Soils, where of the 5 witnesses, usually at these sorts of hearings, if we're lucky, sort of the one regenerative person has snuck onto the panel, right? This had 4 regenerative oriented witnesses and 1 conventional ag person. Never, I mean, this hasn't happened before. Nothing like it has happened. And so the Regenerate America Coalition, we've put together a policy platform to support the widespread adoption of regenerative agriculture. And it includes, for instance, infrastructure support for things like meat processing, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to tell ranchers to go raise their animals regeneratively, and then they've got no way to process them and get them to market. So it's a good platform, and we'll be putting out information through our email list as action points come up. We haven't quite gotten to where there's a whole lot of action for the grassroots to be taking, but there will be, because it's a farm bill year coming up. So there will be a lot to do post-election to work on getting pieces of that platform into the farm bill. So, you know, this, and it's the same thing. Find out who your US congressperson is, call him or her, look at their bio. You're like, okay, what makes them tick? And how does having healthy soils and a good food, secure food supply relate to what makes them tick? So any questions or comments?
Joan?
Yes.
I was privileged to be a citizen lobbyist in Massachusetts before I returned back to Texas. And I've not been involved with the legislative sessions here. And I know that we were able to contact the offices ahead of time and ask for who was the staff person that was in charge of this. Is that also true in Texas legislature?
So the microphone cut out for a moment there, but I think I got enough of it. They usually will have staff persons, staff assigned to committees. So it'll be like, so Wilson will have 3 different staff people, and one of them will take, the appropriations committee and the property committee and the transportation committee. And one of them will take the public health committee and the ag committee and this. I mean, so they'll usually divide it up by committee. And so, yeah, it'll be, you can contact them and be like, so who's handling food and ag bills? Which would generally be the public health and the ag committee. Often it'll be the same person, not always. But usually, even if it's not the same person, if you get hold of either of them, then they'll be close enough. It's not such a big staff. That if you at least get to, within their ballpark of what they cover, it'll be the right conversation.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
This may not be a topic that is exactly attached to this, but I've been hearing about the PFOA contamination in not just in our Maine, where some organic farmer used mulch or compost that was contaminated with PFOA. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that you know about that?
So again, I got that it was about the PFOA contamination, including in some farmers' usage. You'll have to excuse me if I lost some nuances because the mic keeps deciding to go silent. I know of it. I mean, I know what you're talking about. I don't know policy work around it. And
I can send, I actually read an article just like 2 weeks ago about some of the stuff that EPA is doing going after that. And Texas A&M is actually doing some research and they found a fungus that like gets rid of it apparently. So, and there's like a whole bunch of other research being done in different area using enzymes and bacteria to try to break it down. Because we know this one is like a forever chemical, but we just sort of use these terms when we haven't been able to figure out what breaks it down, but I shared it on the Central Texas Mycology page if you follow that, or the group on Facebook. But I can find it and put it on the AOG page. About, you know, what, like it talks about the EPA, what they're doing, but it doesn't talk about any legislature actions. But, you know, if the EPA is like taking it very seriously right now, like it's, I don't know, like what has happened in like the legislatures per se.
I'm inside.
When I can.
Yeah. I had a question about,
So, and let me, I do want to say one thing, and I'd love to see that article.
Yeah.
And if the APA is working on it, then definitely you wouldn't start with legislative. I do want to be careful about, or just say, I encourage that we focus on how we even have organic farming. Like, I mean, I don't want PFOAs in my food. I mean, I'm very concerned about these chemicals. I'm very concerned with all of it. And I'm very concerned that organic farming is not profitable right now. Organic farming, we have yet to make small scale organic farming profitable. And when we have huge problems if we want this movement to literally even survive. I mean, and so we have to be careful about what we focus on. And that's not, again, it's not to say that PFOAs aren't important. I get it. I don't want those chemicals in my food. I just, you know, I'm seeing farmers going out of business left and right.
yeah.
So like the energy needs to be on how do we keep our organic farmers going?
Yeah. And I try to follow the farm bill when it comes up, you know, because we all know that the subsidies go for, you know, the big industry, the corn growers, the soy growers. Is there any movement, or I haven't followed it super closely this year. I've been following a little bit about land access issues, but is there, I mean, what has to happen, or what have you been able to see any examples where the dial has turned a little bit to where there's like more subsidies and things put towards, you know, regenerative and organic agriculture projects?
Sorry, I muted myself to move locations. Give me 1 second.
While she's setting up, did she give us contact information?
Yeah, yes. And it's FARFA is the website.
So the website is farmandranchfreedom.org is the website. FARFA is the acronym, but the website's the full one. Though farfa.org will get you to where you can get tickets for our San Antonio fundraiser.
You did.
So going to the question about trying to shift the dynamics, that is a lot of what the Regenerate America platform is about, trying to find how to structure some of this in ways that will better support regenerative. So for instance, right now, one of the big problems with crop insurance, which is one of the biggest benefits that the conventional ag guys get, is you actually get penalized for doing things like cover cropping because it doesn't fit the system the way they've built it. And so things like that really need to change. And that is very much part of the Regenerate America's platform. At the same time, there's that happening. There's a lot more grant money coming our way. So USDA, for instance, is putting a lot more dollars into small scale and regenerative ag programs than we've ever seen. A huge amount by our standards. Not huge necessarily, but actually, I mean, we're heading into hundreds of millions. It's real money, even by big ag standards, frankly. The problem has been, you also have to make structural changes. So what we've been bringing up to USDA, for instance, again, on meat processing is one of our big areas, is they have put quite a bit of money towards trying to support small scale processors to become what's known as USDA inspected processors. But the standards for what it is to be a USDA inspected processor are really scale prejudicial. I won't even just say they're not scale sensitive, they're affirmatively scale prejudicial, which means that they're basically, the analogy I make, I'm like, they're funding someone to roll a really heavy boulder up a hill rather than reducing the size of the hill. And so if we want to be effective, I think we have to have this both encouraging the subsidies, the grants, the programs towards regenerative and small scale, and looking at what is scale appropriate regulatory structure, so that we aren't frankly just throwing money at a problem that could be better solved by having regulations that are appropriate for what our type of farmers and food producers are doing.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else have questions? One of the things that I see quite a bit in a lot of like shifts in our local community, and this is something that's happening on the scale like all across the US, is like land access and the ability for young farmers to be able to start become a farmer because the land has just gone up. And I see that there's a lot of discussion around that. Do you know if there's any way we can kind of stay informed at the local level? Area on a local level?
So I know that the Austin Food Policy Council has taken up this issue off and on. And it's a difficult problem because part of it is just sheer, like, what do you do about land prices? I mean, it's not like, anybody's got the ability to wave the wand and change land prices. But I do know that at the local level, the Austin Travis County Food Policy Council has a working team on that, or at least they used to. I haven't talked with them recently. And there's also work being done, that's definitely part of the Farm Bill discussions. It's indirectly part of our fair property tax thing. We are looking, one of the challenges is a young farmer can't afford to go buy 20 acres necessarily. They're far more likely to be able to buy 2 acres to get their start. But if they can't get ag valuation on those 2 acres, then they're paying a lot more in taxes. So, it's one of the pieces of our property tax bill. But there's a lot more in the Farm Bill discussions about how do we, it's part of it is linking up, for instance, retiring farmers with young farmers. Part of it is doing grant programs that help the farmers buy in, but then also help them manage their farm so that they're successful. It's not just buying the land, it's ensuring that once you've invested that money in that young farmer to buy that land, how do we make sure they have a path to success?
Mm-hmm. All right, any other questions? I think that wraps it up. This has been a really educational and informative talk, and we definitely have some things we can use and good resources to have a more active voice. But yeah, let's give Judith a round of applause. She can get her baby to sleep. Story time. Thank you for joining us tonight, and yeah, thanks everybody out on the live stream for joining us as well. But yeah, we're going to sign off, and everybody have a good night. Good night. Okay.